the 21st day of March, 2024. Hello everybody, welcome back to the Crazies. I'm going to be your host today, Dana Durnford. I'm also known as the nuclearproctologist.org, and you can call into these shows. We're in Canada. It's 709-589-4406. 1709-589-4406. And we have the world's first nuclear energy summit. This comes on the heels of Conference of Parties 28 last year in Dubai, where nuclear was pledged by many countries to triple by 2050. And for nuclear to triple, there's currently 407 running nuclear reactors, for power that is. There's many more for laboratories, research institutes, universities, etc. And so they had a big shindig in Brussels. And we're going to start off with, there was a bunch of prime ministers and presidents, over 30 of them, from mostly unheard of representatives. Like, these are the presidents, prime ministers of countries that we don't see in Western media, for instance, very often. And they're a ragtag bunch for sure. So the day one was 11 hours, and so when I went to download, I got up 5 a.m. to watch it, and then I downloaded it about an hour after it stopped. That wasn't enough time for YouTube to render it, and so what I downloaded was the last 4 hours, not the first 4 hours, which is what I wanted. And so I had to do it the hard way, and so for the last 5 hours I've been editing while live streaming it to the TriCaster, right? Okay, so I'm going to start off by playing the opening speeches of all the prime ministers and presidents. Not all of them, but the majority of them, because I couldn't edit through everything in 5 hours, because you're talking about 11 hours, right? And we're just going to go through that. That won't take you very long. And you're going to see similarities in each one of their speeches. And then we're going to talk about that after. And we'll just jump right into it.
And now I would like to give the floor to the Prime Minister of Finland, His Excellency Petteri Orpo.
Nuclear energy is a key in building clean, secure and affordable energy system. Setting your EU 2040 climate target is one of the key priorities for the coming years. Nuclear energy together with renewables is an answer to decarbonize our energy system and industry.
And now please welcome the Prime Minister of Hungary, His Excellency Viktor Orbán.
The question became absolutely obvious. How can we generate big quantity of electricity in a cheap, safe, sustainable and environmentally friendly way? The answer is clear. It is only the nuclear way of generating electricity which can simultaneously satisfy all these requirements.
Thank you, Your Excellency. And for the next national statement, I'm very honored to give the floor to the Prime Minister of the Netherlands. Please welcome Mr. Mark Rutte.
Presence here this is the first ever nuclear energy summit. It illustrates, I believe, a widespread recognition of the crucial role that nuclear power can play in and combating climate change.
Thank you very much, Mr. Prime Minister Rutte. And we now invite the members and observers of the Nuclear Alliance on the stage for a family picture. We will resume the order of the national statements right after, so please may I welcome all the members and all the observers of the Nuclear Alliance. Thank you. We will wait for Mr. Tusk, but I will continue with the Prime Minister of Slovakia, His Excellency Robert Fico.
Is able to close, at the same time is able to deal with the accidents, because we had one accident in 70s in Slovakia. So please, everyone who is interested in experience in the field of atomic power is welcomed to Slovakia. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. And now may I ask a warm welcome to the Prime Minister of Slovenia, His Excellency Robert Golob.
There is no doubt that the global warming is the major threat to humanity.
See. And now please welcome the Prime Minister of Sweden, His Excellency Ulf Kristersson.
Let me first really thank you, Prime Minister De Croo, for organizing this very first Energy Summit. As everybody knows, the world needs more clean electricity, and an important part of that is more nuclear power as well. We need it, obviously, to combat climate change, and we need it to make the world safer in a time of geopolitical upheaval. At COP28, more than 20 countries, Sweden included, launched the Declaration of Triple Nuclear Energy. The declaration recognizes the key role of nuclear energy in achieving global net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050 and keeping the 1.5-degree goal within reach. On the topic of COP28, I will also underline Sweden's support of IAEA's landmark statement that net zero needs nuclear power. I am looking forward to working closely with you all to achieve our common goals. Thank you so much. Thanks.
Thank you, Your Excellency.
Together we stand for respecting nuclear energy as low-carbon source in key EU legislation. This will help us reach our climate goals. We must include this nuclear strategy.
And now I'm very honored to give the floor to the Senior Advisor to the President for Clean Energy, Innovation and Implementation of the United States of America, Mr. John Podesta.
That Atoms for Peace vision. We see nuclear energy as vital to tackling the climate crisis and building a clean, resilient, and reliable energy economy, both in the United States and around the world. It's why the United States co-led a bold pledge with more than 20 countries at COP28 to triple global nuclear energy capacity by 2050. 2024, of course, is a critical year of implementation for that pledge. We estimate that the United States alone would need to build 200 gigawatts of new nuclear capacity to meet our domestic net zero 2050 commitment. We're getting to work. Nuclear fission is already our largest source of clean energy.
Much, Your Excellency. And for the following statement, I would like to ask a warm welcome to the Parliamentary Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs of Japan, His Excellency Masahiro Komura.
It is time for all countries to aim to achieve the common goal of net zero.
Thank you, Minister Dar. And now please welcome the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Turkey, His Excellency Hakan Fidan.
And dear colleagues, it is a distinct pleasure to be at the first Nuclear Energy Summit. Here we acknowledge the role of civil nuclear energy and the fight against climate change.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. And now I would like to give the floor to the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Pakistan, His Excellency Mohammad Ishaq Dar.
I thank the government of Belgium and IAEA for organizing this first ever nuclear energy summit. Contestations and climate change concerns. We need clean and cost-effective energy with immense power density, negligible carbon footprints, and the greenhouse emissions. Nuclear energy offers a viable solution for the future.
And now please welcome the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Azerbaijan, His Excellency Ceyhun Bayramov.
We are gathered here at a crucial time to deliberate on the environmentally conscious pathway of our global energy landscape. The inclusion of nuclear energy in the global stocktake at COP28 as a means for reductions in greenhouse gas emissions was indeed a historic milestone.
Please welcome His Excellency Emmanuel Macron.
Our challenge is to deliver on climate change and reduce our CO2 emissions.
The goal of this gathering is to highlight the role of nuclear energy in addressing the global challenges to reduce the use of fossil fuels. And for a reaction to the declaration and the national statements, please welcome the Executive Director of the International Energy Agency to the stage, Dr. Fatih Birol.
Comeback. Second one is, many colleagues mentioned climate change. If we want to reach net zero without having any nuclear, it is impossible. It plays a crucial role.
Well, that's the logistics of the whole thing is predicated upon. You have all these countries, right, saying that nuclear is the solution to climate change. But what you see is this desperation in all of these people, is incredible desperation. And because they're from very impoverished countries, and they're all very humbled, is one thing you notice about it, because they see they just see a way of participating in the world's economics, so to speak, right? And normally they don't have no platform at all. What was interesting, though, on top of that, was you have all these countries, but all their leaders speak really good English, except for a couple, which is really stunning when you put it into perspective. So nuclear power is the solution to clean energy and climate change and carbon free. Without carbon, by the way, you can't have insects or birds or trees or plants or anything else. So this is a picture from, now they didn't mention Fukushima a single time. Fukushima reactor 4 is to your left. Officially, that didn't melt down. That building is not destroyed and nothing has ever gotten out of the building. And you have just a fraction of the media in 2013 that was claiming they were in the fuel pools at the top of the buildings. So this shindig, I think is the better word for it, right? It's just a shindig. A bunch of people that are able to rip off their countries getting together. Ripping off their countries, basically. There's a very small contingency of media. They showed up with all kinds of police escorts. Really cold weather, and they're on motorcycles. This is strictly, like, these are all leaders of countries that they don't even care about, let's face it. They really don't care about these people. but they need them on a pedestal for some reason or another. They're promoting, so within a half an hour you can see them all walking out. No more police, and think about that. What's their carbon footprint of all these jets flying there to Brussels? And they got the militaries and the navies and the air forces and the armies. They got intelligence agencies. They got probably 10,000 police officers. What's the carbon footprint of all of this, I wonder? And they just wandering around all of a sudden, la-di-da. But originally it was all this prominence. Here they're going for their big photo op before they go in. And you can see Grossi's like a worm with two legs, eh? And we're very familiar with Grossi around here. He's what we call a supervillain, right? Raphael Grossi. There's probably no other way to describe him. The official story is nothing got out of the melted reactors at Japan, and that started August the 24th of 2023. The buildings are actually gone. There's around 16 to 20 fuel pools were at the top of these two buildings, or reactor cores in 4 fuel pools. Each building got 2 fuel pools, and each pool had 8 to 10 reactor cores. And the reactor cores of these creatures are pure uranium, pure plutonium. They're equal to about 100 Chernobyls each. And so they picked up 30 million one-ton bags. The food was banned by 55 countries for a decade. And the countries that had the bans in place, the people that those administrators were, they had new elections. They were replaced by the pro-nuclear community. The ELP system actually doesn't work at Fukushima. And if it did work, 2.2 sieverts per hour, the filters are so radioactive after 20 minutes you can never get back in the building. It's a total. So 2013, 2.2 sieverts. But to tell the story of Fukushima, we've got to dodge back to this video of 2013 where the BBC, Rupert Winfield Hayes, is explaining with the BBC there's 1,000 tanks and what's in the tanks. And it ain't what they've been telling you for the last decade, that's for sure. So let's just meander through this. Not a very long video, a very important one though.
The Fukushima plant sits smack in the middle of an underground aquifer. Deep beneath the ground, the site is rapidly being overwhelmed by water. Beneath the surface, water flows downhill and into the basement of the damaged reactor buildings. There it is contaminated with high levels of radiation. To stop the groundwater flowing on into the nearby ocean, engineers are building an underground barrier. But that is causing the groundwater level to rapidly rise. It's now so high the water will soon reach the surface. Then it will start flowing overground into the sea. This week, the company that owns Fukushima, TEPCO, made this disturbing admission.
We understand that this water discharge is beyond our control, and we do not think the current situation is good.
Outside experts say it's now clear TEPCO is incapable of handling the cleanup at Fukushima. It's time for the Japanese government to step in. The situation is already beyond what TEPCO can handle, he says. If it were possible to take proper measures, they would have done it already. It's not as if TEPCO is refusing to do what they can. They're doing everything they can, but there are no perfect solutions. Even if the government does step in, it's not clear what it can do. The only other solution is to pump out the contaminated groundwater and put it in storage tanks. But after just 2 years, the site is already jammed with more than 1,000 giant tanks. Most of them are already full up. At least 400 tons of new water pours into the site every day, and it's going to continue for years and years. Fukushima's water crisis has only just begun. Rupert Wingfield Hayes, BBC News in Tokyo.
So, I've done 6 years of research expeditions after Fukushima due to the fact that radioactive fallout is actually global warming. And all nuclear power plants are hemorrhaging radiation from the fuel pools. They're still splitting the atoms, and there's no containment. But Fukushima was the straw that broke the ecosystem, and our most precious resource, water's back. Studies were shown in Canada, this is an Ottawa study, Canada, of 220 million atoms per liter of iodine-129. So it's not a super powerful, but it's a super longevity. But it's enough to destroy all the chromosomes and DNA and cells. It pulses energy almost at the speed of light every second for 15 million years. And 10 half-lives is 150 million years. So we had this massive radioactive fallout, covered the entire planet. I launched research expeditions from Vancouver, British Columbia to Alaska for 6 years. And what I found right away was just unbelievable. It was unbelievable. So here I was, faced with a reality that was so bizarre that I assume nobody's going to believe me. So how do I go about telling that story? And the story was that the species to your left were extinct. And how do you prove this, right? Well, there's many ways you can prove it, but there's other ways you have to prove. And one of them was you had to repeat the experiment for several years. So we've done a total of 6 years of research expeditions, 4 to 5 months without coming off the ocean. Yeah, we go into ports and stuff like that to pick up fuel and food and then straight back out. And the coastline that I've done, we're talking about 27,000 islands. This is a tropical rainforest coastline. And the species are the genetic superior selected species. They were wiped out due to the radioactive fallout from Japan. So to say that nuclear has some environmental attributes is simply dishonest. The species to your left, now the original footage, these are before and after pictures, and I used to be a commercial diver, and I'm very familiar with this entire ecosystem. So the species to your left are actually exterminated after 6 years of returning for 4 to 5 months a year. Brutally difficult to do. I was now satisfied that I had done. There was no oasis left on the coastline. It was just a total extinction event, and it's hard to comprehend the species. I would imagine for the average person to your left, because unless you see it with your own two eyes, a lot of the times it evades your consciousness. So the plume took 19.5 days, 468 hours. And so there was 7,000 species. There was 480 species of worms. There was all kinds of shellfish. For instance, there was oysters and clams and gooey ducks and small clams like little necks and manillas and bigger ones like the razorbacks. There was the whelks, the mussels, the snails, the periwinkles. There was this incredible diversity of shellfish. It was very distinct. And so when the birds would migrate along the coastline, there was tons of species in the tidal zone to supplement the migratory species that they normally followed, right? They were now gone. They were gone due to perpetual radioactive fallout. These models are based on plutonium. That one up there is 20 days of plutonium-239 dispersals based on TEPCO's number. So with an extinction event playing out, it was no big surprise to see the media running out and claiming they were in the fuel pool of a reactor that doesn't exist, because obviously that's going to scuttle that industry. But I went out there for 6 years doing the research expeditions, and it's hard to comprehend how methodical I am in literally everything I do when it comes to nuclear. I have no issues dedicating 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and after week, month after month, to that pursuit. And when you plug in an extinction level event into that equation, then the urgency is it's very palatable. So Fukushima Reactor 3, for instance, They claim they got the fuel out of the pool, but in the videos you can actually see the reactor cores and the fuel pools falling back down to Earth. The typical consensus from all the major institutions, France and most of the countries, is that, well, all of them actually, was 20 to 30 days the plume covers the entire planet. This is 26 days. And so this stuff never goes away. And the tidal zones are very vulnerable because they're exposed twice a day. And there's nothing on the planet, no species, that has an immune trigger to defend against radioactive fallout. And we had more than our share of it. It's sustained. We have endless studies that quantifies that assertion. And the research expeditions also clearly show the horror of this industry. So another issue with the nuclear industry is all the nuclear power plants, except for a few, are surrounded by farms. And originally when I was, because I covered this for so long, 22 years, but when you run across something so unique, sometimes it kind of evades you because you just don't want to believe what you're seeing. And that was the case with nuclear power plants. I started looking for pictures to see the areas, and it was just that concept itself. And then I quickly noticed that almost every single nuclear power plant was surrounded by farms, typically as far as you can see. And so, because there's so many studies saying that this is an insane idea because of the emissions from the fuel pools. So the fuel pools have no containment. Once you take the reactor core out, it's still splitting atoms for 1 million homes. And now you're going to put it in a pool in increments. But over 40 years, you got maybe 8 reactor cores at the top of each of these boiling water reactor buildings. And so it appears to me that this is not an accident, and that the idea was because they hemorrhage radiation from the fuel pools constantly, and they're always adding to the fuel pool. So as the plant gets older, it's splitting more atoms into the environment because there's no containment at the fuel pool. And that's why they have the tall, skinny stack. That's meant to get the radiation up high enough that it falls off site when they're venting it. And they're always venting it from the fuel pool. Each fuel pool is boiling off about 120,000 liters, about 1,000 fuel pools worldwide. So when I started noticing the one thing, it was like a shock to me. I was going through the pictures, and then I went backwards through the pictures, and I had about 10 or 15 pictures at this point downloaded. And I knew what I was looking at. I said, this is huge. This is unbelievable. Almost every nuclear power plant is surrounded by farms. And I was mortified. But anyway, I ended up grabbing about 100 pictures, with elevation shots. And to my absolute horror, 99 of them were surrounded by farms. And typically, the further you can see, the more farms you're going to see. And so radiation has many serious attributes that make it a issue for all species, not just humans. So whenever you see these kind of stuff and you're talking about humans, remember this is 1,000 times worse on the species, insects and birds, mammals and animals. So how low doses of radiation causes heart diseases and strokes. But there's liver problems, lung problems, respiratory, pituitary, thyroid, adrenaline. Later, there's Alzheimer's and dementia. And the first studies they're going to do is autism and Down syndrome. That's the very first studies they're going to do after a nuclear accident. And if you're surrounding farms, or nuclear power plants with farms, you're building it in prime farmland, then you're in for some serious bad statistics 10, 20, 30, 40 years down the road. Now, we're 70, 80 years down the road, and the statistics are horrifying. But Fukushima was a pulse event. You had multiple reactors and fuel pools releasing a prodigious amount of releases, sustained forever. So this study was from the government, the IRS, and the French government itself. The study was only based on 9 days, but they were shown, this was a study showing 1 million to 10 million atoms per cubic meter of air, cesium-137. So you got to put in uranium, plutonium. The biggest byproduct is the curium isotopes. And curium isotopes need lead shielding 20 times thicker than you do for the plutonium. And so this particular model was only based on 9 days on the 18th rather. That's so 7 days after the tsunami, 2 days after the last reactor blew up. And we showed the coast and a chunk of the Pacific buried in significant radioactive fallout. Of course, when you move the models, and I showed you their model earlier of the 30 days, at 19 days the whole planet is basically covered. And it doesn't stop coming out is the issue with this stuff, right? So just inhaling one hot particle will eventually invoke a cancer. So what is it going to do to something much more vulnerable like an insect or fungus or bacteria, which is the basis of the ecosystem, by the way? What's it going to do to the important keystone species, which are thousands and thousands of times more vulnerable than a human is when it has that particular attribute? And why is every nuclear power plant surrounded by farms when there's just a ridiculous amount of studies saying that's the last thing you want to do? Because if you do that, you're going to poison the population. But see, the poisoning was well underway just from the nuclear war they had. They call it nuclear testing, but it's the same nuclear weapon with the same radioactive fallout. So 50 becquerels a kilogram in adults lead to irreversible lesions in the vital organ. That's the International Atomic Energy Agency, for goodness sakes. So you think they would be the last ones that would think this was a good idea. And so 50 becquerels a kilogram, think of that as 50 atoms pulsing energy every second. And because it does it forever, so to speak, right? In context of what we're talking about. Long past the human experience, let's put it that way. So I can put 200 million atoms on the head of a needle, but I can't see it. So how do I filter 50 of them? Well, you can't filter 50 of them because they're atoms. You have to filter everything because all the atoms are the same size. So it can't actually be filtered. And when you have plumes inundating the entire biosphere and the ecosystem and the water, the most precious resource, the one resource we should fight with everything in our body for is our water. No species can have a future without water. And they have snuck in and done this to us. And now they got 80 years. So before Fukushima, 100 atoms per kilogram of cesium is nuclear waste. But after, it's safe to eat. So when you only acknowledge cesium, and that's going to be your benchmark, then you're purposely poisoning the population. You're purposely committing genocide. And because the adverse side effects of anthropogenic man-made radiation are well known, well established. They've studied anthropogenic man-made radiation more than all the other elements from the solar system combined. And anthropogenic man-made radiation is not created by the sun. We don't find it in the solar system. Hence, the term anthropogenic man-made. So all nuclear power plants surrounded by farms is an agenda to poison us worldwide and to destroy the atmosphere, the ecosystem, the biosphere, and the fresh water and the salt water, the very life of life. We can't live without the ocean and without fresh water. You can't separate them either. They're the one and the same, right? Because like the fresh water is created by the ocean's evaporation. Tens of thousands of miles of rain clouds every day will come into continents, and when they hit the elevation, they'll lose a lot of their payloads. That will wash down through the continent and distribute it to the ecosystem, the lakes, the streams, the estuaries, etc., right, are dependent upon that cycle. So they know radiation is quickly assimilated into your food, which means, the best way to get rid of the pollinators is to have nuclear accidents or constant nuclear releases, because the pollinators are going to be bringing that, bumblebees and moths and everything are going to bring that back. And should destroy their foundation, right? So when you got every nuclear power plant, except for a very few surrounded by farms, and nobody's willing to have, nobody's ever had this conversation before that I know of. I've never found any literature on this whatsoever. There's nobody who's ever come out and said, hey, that might not be a good idea. Nuclear radiation, by the way, is the most carcinogenic thing that exists. In fact, it's 2 billion times more toxic than industrial poison. So it didn't take long. All the weapons manufacturers were surrounded by farms. All the nuclear dumps were surrounded by farms. All the future nuclear dumps are surrounded by farms or the drinking water. All the national laboratories are built over the biggest aquifers, massive aquifers. And like aquifers as big as Great Lakes. That's where they built the national laboratories on purpose. And they have, since the 50s, contaminated every one of them. And every one of them aquifers are supplying tens of thousands, 10, 20, 30, 40,000 farms downstream. Smalling mascot asked Fukushima kids to gargle to stay safe from radiation, and that radioactive sparkles on happy children. This is Orwellian on a whole different level. Orwell didn't look at nuclear. He wrote his 1984 quite differently. He did include nuclear, but he didn't quite understand the significance. So the Fisher stories, nothing got out of these buildings. There's 4 of them. At the top of each of them were 2 nuclear fuel pools. And they're so belligerent, they're growing food right alongside of 1-ton bags of radiation in a nuclear wasteland surrounded by 14 prefectures that were banned by 55 countries for a decade. It's irreversible. And then we've had polls asking, should all nuclear power plants surrounded by farms be closed? And if you'd done that, then every nuclear power plant would have to close down. Irreversible heart damage for children with 50 becquerels a kilogram. So what's it going to do to a bird, to the insects, to the ecosystem? It's going to be much more severe again, right? And not only that, these numbers in species, because when you got the radioactive fallout, you got alphas and betas and gammas and neutrons, and they're blasting shine, and like cesium will blast shine about 600 feet, 200 meters. And so when it's hitting all the alphas and neutrons and betas, they're pulsing energy almost at the speed of light too. And when they hit each other, they don't mix, they don't mingle. They hit each other and change direction almost at the speed of light. So you have 2 objects almost at the speed of light hitting each other. That creates full body X-rays for everybody and everything. And so when it's in the forest, floating around or laying there in the forest or assimilated in the forest, just because it's inside a plant or something like that doesn't mean it doesn't pulse 600 feet. And so the whole system starts becoming sterilized, but it takes quite a few decades. And you can trace the decline of all the species directly back to the nuclear industry. Why is every nuclear power plant surrounded by farms? And how can conference of parties, constipated parties we call them, 28 want to triple something so evil and with so many vicious adverse effects from it. So when you look at these nuclear power plants surrounded by farms, it's hard to comprehend the real true horror of it, because the fuel pools are still splitting the same atoms they were when they took them out of the reactor core, except there's no containment, and that each of these are 2 billion times more toxic than industrial poison. And you can't see it or smell it or hear it or feel it or taste it or pick it up or perceive it, right? It's not like you got diesel on your food or you got gasoline on your food. And when you see these kind of pictures where there's nothing but farms everywhere you look, this is an industry that hates us and the species. And when you see a bunch of leaders getting together at a big shindig and all promoting nuclear as the attribute, as a solution to the issues caused by the radioactive fallout in the first place. The reason we're in so much trouble, and if you look at all the die-off of the species, what you're going to see is this correlation with supercell storms and die-offs and everything else, and massive floods and wildfires, all post-Fukushima. This is where everything just accelerated immediately. And then pretend that somehow or another more nuclear is going to be the solution. And of course, now I only clipped out climate change from the speakers, right? And the reality of it was they also talked about the small modular reactors as a solution. And small modular reactors don't exist. And so geothermal is your obvious solution, not nuclear. Geothermal was the solution. Geothermal can be up and running in 1 year instead of 15. Geothermal, you can produce twice or 3 times as much for the same amount you're going to spend on nuclear. And a typical nuclear power plant, in order to stay productive, is going to spend about $100 million a year on upgrades and repairs to that site, which works out to about $270,000 a day. So a nuclear power plant, in order to remain running, it's always lethal, has to spend, in order to keep the upgrades on these massive sites, these the most resource-intensive industry in human history, is about $270,000 a day. So a geothermal, you basically spend nothing for 50 years, except for, grease and stuff like that. And then nuclear is situated in farmland, like I just showed you, because that's how they move the high radiation out of the local area, because they have to deal with it, see? And if you don't build it in the farmland, the local area is going to be so radioactive, they're not going to be able to hide it. So they build them in farms, or they build them in cities. And when you put them in a city, and there's a few examples, then you're going to see an explosion of heart and liver and lung and respiratory and pituitary and thyroid and adrenaline and Alzheimer's and dementia and autism, diabetes and Down syndrome, schizophrenia. You're going to see this absolutely unbelievable explosion of illnesses and diseases. And they own the universities. They've captured them in the 40s and 50s during the major secrecy when they were given unlimited power, and there was no way they were going to let that power go away. So the nuclear industry had Fukushima, and you want to blame TEPCO, but don't blame TEPCO. TEPCO is just an operator, and they're not a decommissioned authority. They were left there so you would blame them, but the blame should fall thoroughly on the nuclear industry, which allowed it to happen. They built the reactors in an earthquake zone where there's over 1,000 earthquakes a year, right alongside of a fault line that's known to rupture for thousands of years, and that the tsunamis have thousands of years legacy. So when you put reactors with the fuel pools on the top of the buildings in a zone where you have a 3,000-year history of earthquakes and tsunamis up to 300 feet high, there's no way they didn't know this was going to happen, and they most likely already knew when it was going to happen. So when you look at the building to the left, that's reactor 4. That's just one of the 4 reactors. And there was 2 fuel pools at the top of that building. They're gone with around 8 reactor cores to 10 reactor cores. So last year, we noticed this strange story in July the 13th, 2023 showed up. Science outweighs irrational reasoning. Young Jong-il was a professor at the Department of Nuclear Quantum Engineering in South Korea's CAST. Very prestigious position, by the way. And he was talking about Fukushima. He was saying that, now I played a video for you before that clearly debunks what he's saying here, that the wastewater is not wastewater. This was highly radioactive water, lethal doses of 2.2 sieverts of just beta per liter. Where here he's claiming is that the total capacity of the 1,000 tanks is 2.2 grams of tritium, and that they're going to release 0.6 grams each year for 30 years. And I mean, this is insane when they closed 130 schools down because of radioactive fallout in the 2011 administration. The current administration is incredibly pro-nuclear and has disregarded. And so he says that this is a professor of nuclear and quantum engineering. In order to protect the nuclear industries, after making these assertions that the discharges into the Pacific were equal to throwing 3 grams of sugar into the ocean. Clearly, this is not equal to 3 grams of sugar into the ocean. And there's a long list of these people, and I can go on verbatim for a very long period of time. And it's just an endless barrage of this industry contempt for humanity. This model is the French's model. That's based on 20 days right here of radioactive fallout. That's Macron's government model of a million to 10 million atoms per cubic meter of fresh air, right? So let's go back and let's challenge some of these narratives. Now, they talk about small modular reactors. I don't have that in there.
And now I would like to give the floor to the Prime Minister of Finland, His Excellency Petteri Orpo.
Nuclear energy is a key in building clean, secure and affordable energy system.
Well, it's not affordable. It's the small modular reactors, NuScale, was the only one with an application into the regulatory agency, right? Which is an American company, which is basically the government, a breakaway from the government, supported by the government. And they milked investors out of billions of dollars and the government out of $5 billion. And that was on purpose. It was total money grab, and didn't try to build a small modular reactors. And certain groups out there with the system showed it would have cost $16 to $20 billion to build a half a gigawatt. It was actually 460 megawatts of energy with small modular reactors from NuScale. Now, NuScale didn't even have the license, the full application in to the regulatory agency. And the whole process, said there's 1 million pieces of paper. And so they submit that to the regulatory agency. The regulatory agency has 400 or 500 people shift through the 1 million pieces of paper with the engineers, nuclear engineers and stuff like this. And they find a bunch of flaws every time, right? These are new reactors we're talking about. They don't exist. So there's this whole process that still has to happen. So any future small modular reactor is going to have to go through this exact same process I'm describing. And so once the application is in, it takes about 4 to 5 years for 300-400 people to go through 1 million pieces of paper and say, okay, we need to change all this. They bring it back and give it back to NuScale. NuScale redesigns it with their engineers, submits it again, and that takes 3 or 4 years. So you're 8, 9, 10 years down the road at this stage. Now the regulatory agency has to go through all this paperwork again, and then they're going to find more flaws. Once they get through that 15 years down the road, that back and forth, then they can raise funding to get land or another site, which is typically going to be a government laboratory. And they're going to build a model, an actual working reactor. And there's a big process there. It takes 5 or 6 years before they actually start building the reactor. And everything has to be triple-E inspected. It's very expensive, right? Only the best of the best materials allowed to be used. Once they build it, then they got to run it for 5 or 6 years or longer, and find out the flaws in it. They got to run it at extraordinary. They got to literally break it, run it till it drops, and then they can find the flaws into it. Then it goes back to the engineers of NuScale. They redesign everything now to accommodate that. Then they got to build a new version. So you're 20 years down the road at this stage. Okay, so they built a new version. Now they got to run that for a number of years. They're going to redesign that when they start mass producing these things. But by this time, renewables, and let me explain that, because when you look at what's renewable doing, you're looking at what nuclear is doing, you can see why they got all these little countries that have no say in the world all of a sudden put on a pedestal. If they're going to build a new version of a dangerous version of a mixed oxide, plutonium mixed oxide fueled reactor, like a small modular reactor, it's best to build it in somebody else's country, like they've done with the nuclear testing, right? Look what they've done to Christmas Island. Look what the French done to the French Polynesians. Look what the British done to Australia, Marilingo, Montebello. Look what the Americans done to the Marshall Islands, where it's still 1 million square kilometers still too radioactive to be habitable. Okay, so last year, 2023, nuclear goes backwards. So nuclear last year went back 1.7 gigawatts, which is equal to a little bit, like 2 large reactors, very large reactors. Whereas renewables was 507 gigawatts, which is equal to, let's be, downplay, say 600 large reactors in 12 months. So if you've done that across Canada, renewables across Canada that much, then it's always windy or it's always sunshine, not too far away. Like if it's not windy in your town, the next town is. And so if you've got lots of renewables, the grid just feeds itself, right? So it works 100% of the time. But why, wind and solar should be backup to geothermal, like be for peak power. But geothermal is amazing. It's been around forever. We can build it in 1 year with off-the-shelf supplies. Nothing needs to be triple inspected on top of it, so to speak. You don't have to look for farmland. And how do you quantify even looking at nuclear when renewables, particularly geothermal, anything nuclear could do, geothermal can do better and quicker, and like 12 years quicker. Nuclear takes forever, and then it has endless issues. Okay, let's play the next one.
Setting your EU 2040 climate target is one of the key priorities for the coming years. Nuclear energy together with renewables is an answer to decarbonize our energy system and industry.
So, and they're always trying to do that where they're saying, well, wind and solar can't provide power 24 hours, so you need nuclear. There's nothing else would work. But geothermal works. Geothermal works 100% of the time. Just let me bring some geothermal headlines in that I forgot to import. We'll get there. And there's incredible breakthroughs with geothermal too. Just to give you some concepts. So Balmoral Castle, I guess it is, could be heated. Beyond the spa, geothermal bubbles up to heat. Now, it's unbelievably great for greenhouses too. All winter long, harsh winters, geothermal is perfect. Geothermal is making big waves. And the only issue geothermal had was being able to drill deep enough to get like 1,000 degree Fahrenheit temperatures. But the only reason that was an issue was because as you get close to it, it's really hard on the drill bits. But the solution was pneumatic hammers and pneumatic water jets. So 25,000 pounds per square inch ahead of the drill of water would slice up the rocks. And then you have pneumatic hammers to break the rocks to pieces, and then the drill just goes right through, and you can put your pipes there. And so now you're 4, 5, 6 times quicker than the conventional drilling has been, which is from the oil, because we got a long history now of drilling, right, for oil wells and gas wells and stuff like that, artesian wells. And so we've cracked that. And there's other solutions, though, besides that. So, and they're coming into effect this year, and they'll be mass-produced over the next few years. So leaps and so if they don't come out and push reactors right now, in a few years' time, they won't be able to get there will be a big resistance when they open their mouth.
Nuclear energy together with renewables is an answer to decarbonize our energy system and industry.
And now please welcome the Prime Minister of Hungary, His Excellency Viktor Orbán.
The question became absolutely obvious. How can we generate big quantity of electricity in a cheap, safe, sustainable and environmentally friendly way? The answer is clear. It is only the nuclear way of generating electricity which can simultaneously satisfy all these requirements.
Right, and so suggesting that nuclear is the only solution is the best way to destroy your country. In fact, James Lucid actually nailed it on the head in the comment section. Geothermal augmented by sand batteries. And not only sand batteries, of course, but I love sand batteries because every country has sand. And it's a very exciting technology. We've covered it here a few times. There's another one that I thought was really amazing. So if you use the combination, for instance, was volcanic rock. Because volcanic rock can turn red hot, and that's what it does, right? It's able to retain that heat for very long times of time. So imagine marrying those two technologies together, right? Because sand can hold heat for, I think, 3, 4, 5 weeks or something, like 700 Fahrenheit temperatures. And everybody got sand. And there's many other technologies. So there's compressed air storage, where you dig mine shafts and you just compress air 120 pounds per square inch. And then the heat from the compressed air is stored in sand or volcanic rocks. And then you can liberate that back when you want to unpack the heat to use it to run a generator. And it can hold the heat for so long, you're never going to be in that kind of a lull, right? So for peak power, this is like unbelievably, unimaginably perfect. And so for him to suggest that there is no solution, and this was the consensus, that there is no solution, only nuclear, and even to suggest and even do memorandums of understanding, which is what we've seen over the last 4 and 5 years for small modular reactors that don't exist and probably won't, because there's so many better solutions. And the only thing that's holding us back is them. That's what's holding the entire planet back, or a military-industrial complex like United Nations and their subsidies like the International Atomic Energy Agency. Having that kind of control where they can bring all these prime ministers and presidents and make these memorandums of understanding for a technology that is
Thank you,
hopeless.
Your Excellency. And for the next national statement, I'm very honored to give the floor to the Prime Minister of the Netherlands. Please welcome Mr. Mark Rutte.
Yeah. Rutte is quite the character, isn't he?
Presence here this is the first ever nuclear energy summit.
Right, so this is the first one. Why did they wait 70 years? Why did you wait 70 years? Because all the other technology is curb stomping. I showed you that evidence just now. Where renewables was 507 gigawatts last year, over 600 large nuclear reactors equivalent. And last year, nuclear went backwards 2 large reactors. And so coming up making these assertions, there is no other solution only nuclear. You can put all these crazies together, but the truth makes them look like monsters.
It illustrates, I believe, a widespread recognition of the crucial role that nuclear power can play in and combating climate change.
But it can't. How can nuclear combat climate change? Like, it doesn't work when you got geothermal and you got renewables that can be implemented for sometimes 1/10 the cost and 1/15 of the time. And where nuclear is already shown to be completely the opposite of what they say it is. Like, watch this video. In order for nuclear to survive, they got the media and the big medias pretending they're in the fuel pool. This is the only way they can survive. I'm going to play that clip for you.
I was standing is on top of what
turn it
used
up.
to be reactor building number 4. The whole of this building was blown apart by a huge explosion.
We are here inside Reactor 4 at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant that was severely crippled during the earthquake and tsunami of 2011.
Of the decommissioning work taking place here in Reactor 4.
At the end of our tour, we were checked for radiation exposure. In 4 hours, I received the equivalent of less than a chest x-ray.
1,500 highly radioactive fuel rods inside this pool. They've got to move them outside of this reactor.
So, excuse me, I'm gargling water in the background there. I thought I had the volume down. I'm sure that was nice. So, for nuclear to exist, they got to put together a big network of prime ministers and presidents, put them together in the same building. But the majority of these people, these prime ministers and presidents, would have done it for a couple of $1,000s. Their country's so broke, right?
Thank you very much, Mr. Prime Minister Rutte. And we now invite the members and observers of the Nuclear Alliance on the stage for a family picture. We will resume the order of the national statements right after. So please, may I welcome all the members and all the observers of the Nuclear Alliance. Thank you.
Did she say family picture? Let me play that again.
Thank you very much, Mr. Prime Minister Rutte. And we now invite the members and observers of the Nuclear Alliance on the stage for a family picture.
Yeah.
We will resume.
A family picture. James Lucid picked that up earlier. I seen that. I thought he was just making a funny joke, right? It was funny, but unfortunately it's not a joke. Let's put all the goblins together. Those guys on the end there, look a fat lip up there. Where's the guy with the shit fly on his shoulder, the Armenian? That's him hidden in the background back there, right? These guys, when you look at him, like Macron looks like he's fucking half drunk. He's like, yeah, I had a few cups of wine for breakfast. That's what we do. We're French.
We will wait for Mr. Tusk, but I will continue with...
Yeah, quite a few of them got up and left early, eh? I was here. They got my picture.
The Prime Minister of Slovakia, His Excellency Robert Fico.
His Excellency. It's so ridiculous when you hear it over and over and over, isn't it? Mr. Slick
is able to close. At the same time, is able to deal with the accidents, because we had one accident in 70s in Slovakia. So please.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that accident. I got to look that up tomorrow. How's our poll going tonight? Will the Nuclear Energy Summit's hopes of tripling nuclear power turn out to be just another nuclear flop? Because everything nuclear is a flop, right? That's what nuclear is. It's a flop, man. It's not a flop for the people on the stage, right? They're getting their chunk of the pie regardless, right?
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. And now may I ask a warm welcome to the Prime Minister of Slovenia, His Excellency Robert Golob.
Now, it's been rumored she got fish hooks inside her mouth to keep her face like that. They done it just for this Robert Golob. Goblin/Goblin.
There is no doubt that the global warming is the major threat to humanity.
Yeah, but it's nuclear that's causing it. And so trying to put nuclear as a solution is really despicable. Like it's desperation. Nuclear is the cause. And they have so much power, so much influence. They've never been held accountable. They've taken it to this level now. It's surreal when you sit back and you look at an industry that's never been held accountable. So is nuclear a solution to climate change? And climate change, the best solution is to get rid of all the humans, is it, and all the species? And get rid of all the plants and trees and bacteria and fungus. Japan National Cancer Center says the number of patients rose by 865,000 in 2012. But it's so green and clean and carbon-free, Dana.
See. And now please welcome the Prime Minister of Sweden, His Excellency Ulf Kristersson.
Yeah, he's a real work of art, this guy.
Let me first really thank you, Prime Minister De Croo, for organizing this very first Energy Summit.
The very first? I got a feeling it's going to be the last one, too.
As everybody knows, the world needs more clean electricity.
Well, that's why we got 507 gigawatts of renewables last year and none of nuclear. In fact, you went backwards, 2 large nuclear reactors.
An important part of that is more nuclear power as well.
Well, how is that going to be important when you had 507 gigawatts, which is equal to over 600 large nuclear power plants coming online in 12 months? You can't even get one online in Sweden. It took you 14 years, 17 years or something?
We need it, obviously, to combat climate change.
And so, it struck me when I'm listening to all of these people when they get to their climate change version, which is usually pretty quick, but not in every one of them, that these are words I've heard Raphael Grossi say many, many times. That was one of the things that really bothered me. And I'm assuming Raphael Grossi wrote the first pages.
We need it to make the world safer in a time of geopolitical upheaval.
Well, at any given time, there's 90 wars going on the planet. The geopolitical upheaval can be more attributed to the World Economic Forum's meddling with so many countries, politicians, universities, and schools.
At COP28, more than 20 countries, Sweden included, launched the Declaration of Triple Nuclear Energy.
American government Representative Podesta said they needed 200 gigawatts by 2050. Let's do some math on that. So they got 25 years basically. That's 4 a year, right? That's one every 4 months. So right now they got none in the pipeline. So what do they need? They need, they're going to need 25 started right now to get them finished in 12 years. And in 6 years, they need to get another 25 up and running, being built. So over the next 10 years, 12 years, they need to have 200 power plants being built. The majority of them has to be construction ongoing. It's simply not going to happen, right?
The declaration recognizes the key role of nuclear energy in achieving global net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050 and keeping the 1.5 degree goal within reach.
Global warming is caused by radioactive fallout. 80 years of the emissions, pulsing energy almost at the speed of light every second. And just let me explain that to you, because if you're not familiar with this, it might sound a little strange to you, but it's a very simple concept, and I'm almost to where I need to be to explain this. Just got to bring up some radioactive fallout models. We're just a couple of clicks away. There we go. Yeah, dear. So, the study of radioactive fallout from Fukushima does tell the story tells the story real well. But this is the French government, was 1 million to 10 million atoms per cubic meter of air. Now remember, cesium pulses energy 600 feet for 300 years. But if you got cesium, you're going to have 10 times more or 100 times more strontium-90 after 1,000 days. And that's going to be that way for tens of thousands of days, for about at least 80 years. It's going to be producing those ratios. So gas, oil, and coal emissions don't make a plume that covers the planet. It doesn't travel very far because it's very big material, right? Whereas anthropogenic man-made radiation has that attribute. And that's the only emission we know that has this particular attribute. And this model is only based upon 15 days after the tsunami, or say 9-10 days of radioactive fallout. And this is an invisible plume from the ocean floor right to the upper biosphere. Think of an invisible snowstorm. Let's do that again. Think of this, instead of nuclear, it's a snowstorm. Now, the snowstorm never stops. But at around 15 days, the whole planet's a snowstorm, so you don't see the source anymore. But it never stops coming out. And the snow never goes away, and the snow never melts, because that you'd understand, right? But you can't see it or smell it or hear it or feel it or taste it or pick it up or anything. You can't perceive it, right? So it's the same as a snowstorm, and it never stops coming out. It updates the whole planet, and it's pulsing energy at the speed of light. That's global warming. Gas, oil, and coal emissions is carbon, and carbon is assimilated back into the ecosystem immediately in trees and plants and insects and birds and humans and everything else. And it's the cycle of life itself, long before the human experience, right? And so to suggest that nuclear is the solution to global warming is you got to deal with every 1,000 fuel pools on this planet immediately. They got 30 years of dumping nuclear into the ocean. That's still splitting the ocean, the atoms. And a lot of it was in 45-gallon drums. And so the 45-gallon drums, when they got down to a couple of 100 feet, they got 3 or 4 atmospheres on them, they're going to implode. And that's going to release the radiation immediately into the environment. But there's lots of dumps that they done, like Russia and the Soviet Union got 18,000 dumps in the Arctic, in the ocean, which has been used as a sewer for nuclear. The British were one of the worst. The British spent 30 years with special freighters just going out throwing nuclear waste in drums overboard. And the ships would just steam along on the continental shelf, which is the nursery of the Atlantic, throwing 45-gallon drums overboard, just steaming along. So they contaminated everything. They still got 8 million liters a day coming out of Windscale, which they changed the name to because of the crimes they done, to Sellafield. There's still 8 million liters a day every day hemorrhaging, flowing into the Pacific Ocean. It's unbelievable. What Hanford had dumped so much, we got to clean it up at some point. Now we've filled the basket up with so much pollution that all our water, all our ecosystem, our air, our food sources now are a significant threat to us and all the species. At some point, we're gonna have to try to clean it up, right? But producing more of it is, and particularly the small modular reactors, because like what the studies showed that they were going to produce 30 times more intermediate level or high level waste, 35 times more high level waste, 30 times more intermediate level waste, and 5 times more fuel rods because they're not very efficient. They don't have economy of scales.
On the topic of COP28, I would also underline Sweden's support of IAEA's landmark statement that net zero needs nuclear power.
Again, like how can nuclear be a solution when it's nothing but a problem? And so Conference of Parties 28, which is United Nations, which is a military-industrial complex, right? They were originally the League of Nations, and then after Hiroshima and Nagasaki, they changed their name to United Nations to capitalize on nuclear, because nuclear now was very tangible, was very real, and it was the ultimate bully, right? And so this organization doesn't have any sovereignty over any country, but yet countries are throwing money at it because it's 195 militaries. And no matter, administrations changes every 4 years or so for most countries. United Nations is dear for all the administrations, right? And so they piggyback off the current and the past, rather, administrations. Canada throws billions of dollars every year at different subsidies of United Nations. They have a subsidy for everything. They've taken over your entire planet. And because there's no incentive not to be evil, now they've become evil, just the persona itself of evil. And because these people are career-minded, and the way to career for that organization is how evil are you willing to be? If you're evil enough, we'll get you the right job so you can be that evil person that you aspire to be.
I am looking forward to working closely with you all to achieve our common goals. Thank you so much. Thanks.
Doesn't he look like a weasel, though, when he talks?
I am looking for...
Like, let me turn the volume down because that volume did come out. Most of it came out great, but look at these movements. He's got no shoulders whatsoever.
Together we stand for respecting nuclear energy as low-carbon source in key EU legislation.
A low-carbon source in the EU, which I can't remember. How many was in the EU when the Parliament voted on it? It was 1,000 or something. Let's say it was 1,000. Say it was 1,100 of these unelected administrators, right? Bureaucrats. They're not elected, right? And so there was 551 voted to call nuclear green, and 549 voted to not call it green. And to have that big of a discrepancy when it's blatantly obvious nuclear is not green, and because its particular attributes are so nasty to the future of humanity, it's not just humanity, it's the 8 million species too.
And now I'm very honored to give the floor to the Senior Advisor to the President for Clean Energy, Innovation and Implementation of the United States of America, Mr. John Podesta.
That Atoms for Peace vision.
This Atoms for Peace vision was a disaster with Eisenhower, who also warned you of the military-industrial complex, which is United Nations. The Atoms for Peace wasn't about United Nations. It was about Atoms for Peace. It was about re-imaging a disaster that was the nuclear industry at that time and will always be.
We see nuclear energy as vital to tackling the climate crisis.
Again, right, they're reading off a piece of paper and there's no sincerity, right? There's no spontaneous to it. It's just like...
And building a clean, resilient, and reliable energy economy, both in the United States and around the world.
And he probably only read it once, whoever gave it to him.
It's why the United States co-led a bold pledge with more than 20...
He can't take his eyes off it. He doesn't know what's there. Like he'll look up because that's what he does, but he got his finger right where he's supposed to be.
countries at COP28 to triple global nuclear energy capacity by 2050.
Which means you got to build 25 reactors tomorrow. You got to start building them, get them in the pipeline, because it's going to take you 12, 15 years to get them finished. And in the 6 years, you got to do another 25. And 6 years after that, in fact, you got to get them all up and start building them within 10 years. If you start 200 right now, and you got 200 crews and 200 supply networks, you still might not finish that at 2020, 2050. You might get them finished, but you got so many issues you can't run them. So if you start in 10 years' time, 50 of them in 10 years' time, you're going to be lucky to hit 2050. And can you imagine any country right now trying to build that many without...
2024, of course, is a critical year of implementation for that pledge. We estimate that the United States alone would need to build 200 gigawatts of new nuclear capacity to meet our demand.
Which is more than 200, because a typical reactor is not a gigawatt. Unless it's one of the largest reactors, then it's a gigawatt, right? So you're actually talking about 250 reactors.
We're getting to work. Nuclear fission is already our largest source of clean energy.
Yeah, but it's not clean energy, is it? Right? If you look at the Idaho National Laboratories, if you look at Santa Susana, it was 460 times more radioactive fallout than 3 Mile Island. And 3 Mile Island, they admit, contaminated 2 million people. Except the studies claimed it was equal to watching colored television for an extra year. So this is an industry that everybody should be terrified of. Like, this is the crackhead industry itself, right? Industry of crackheads.
Much, Your Excellency. And for the following statement, I would like to ask a warm welcome to the Parliamentary Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs of Japan, His Excellency Masahiro Komura.
And she's got to lift her shoulders up just so she don't puke. Monsieur,
it is time for all countries to aim to achieve the common goal of net zero.
What the fuck is wrong with his eyes, I wonder? Let me slow that down. I gotta friggin' see that. There's something weird that time. Like some kind of lizard shit. There it is. I speeded it up, did I? Oops. Hang on. I went the wrong way. Oh no, maybe I'm wrong. Hang on, we'll get it this time. Come on there, sideways. Tilt your head back for me. No, it looks almost normal. There you go. So, like, he's probably the worst speaking English guy they got there. Because Kishida couldn't make it. Because you can imagine the controversy if Kishida... I'm surprised they showed up. They don't mention Fukushima.
Thank you, Minister Dar. And now please welcome the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Turkey, His Excellency Hakan Fidan.
And dear colleagues, it is a distinct pleasure to be at the first Nuclear Energy Summit.
The first Nuclear Energy Summit?
And dear colleagues, it is a distinct pleasure to be at the first nuclear. Here we acknowledge the role of civil nuclear energy and the fight against climate change.
Again, here's another guy who doesn't know what he's supposed to say. He's constantly looking at his paper, and he didn't read it beforehand, but it looks like
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. And now I would like to give the floor to the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Pakistan, His Excellency Mohammad Ishaq Dar.
I thank the government of Belgium and IAEA for organizing this first ever nuclear energy summit.
Like, do they really have a right to beat her, Pakistan?
contestations and climate change concerns.
There's millions of children every year die to dysentery, diarrhea, and pneumonia. Could be cured for about 15 cents a kid.
We need clean and cost-effective energy with immense power density, negligible carbon footprints, and the greenhouse emissions. Nuclear energy.
One of the key things you notice when you, like, it's 11 hours. There's a bunch of spots there where you're not going to watch it, but it's very orchestrated to promote the ideology that nuclear is your solution. But I can't. There was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There was only 6 sites streaming it on YouTube. There's other sites out there that were streaming it. But on the 6 YouTube, there was big ones, right? CNN was streaming it with multi-millions of subscribers. Associated Press was streaming it. Reuters was streaming it. And the total number of people watching the streams was around 80 people. So this is not a nuclear renaissance when 80 people are watching the show, right? So there's day 2 is tomorrow. I might be back tomorrow. You never know with Dana. See, there should have been protesters. We were talking about this last night, actually. There should have been protesters there with this on a big sign, right? Like big banners, 10 by 20 feet or something, so that the cameras couldn't point anywhere without seeing that in the background. And asking the question is, why are they pretending they're in Reactor 4? That's just one of the many pictures, wonderful pictures that we got. Like, this one here is insane. When you look at these 2 reactors, when you look at the fact that 55 countries banned the food from 14 prefectures, they picked up 30 million one-ton bags. The list is so very long. And now they're down there pretending that nuclear is the savior. And these people, they're all obviously got the same tailor. They're all dressed by the same person. Their all cuts are so similar, it's unbelievable. But after all these years, the one thing we notice about the nuclear industry is it has an unlimited amount of scumbags at its beck and call. It just conjures them up, it seems, out of nowhere. And this one snuck right past me. I didn't even know this was happening until last night, right? James mentioned it to me, and I was like, wait, what? And I wasn't disappointed when I went there and watched it, I'll tell you that much. I was like, God, these are vicious scum. But there was nobody there of significance. There really wasn't, right? And Grossi just spent a few minutes at best on the podium. And then he spent the rest of the time staring off into space. Most of the times when the camera was pointed in that direction, he was looking at the ground or at the ceiling. It's very boring for him, right? And if you look up Grossi, Raphael Grossi, the Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency's Wikipedia, his whole life is bizarre. He's made his whole living from United Nations, basically, and being a scumbag for United Nations. And every journalist now, we've been doing this for so many years, they're already sold their souls, right? To the highest bidder, no issues asked. So when you look at Fukushima Reactor 3, that was the mixed oxide fuel. And that had 8 reactor cores or so at the very top of the building. When they skinned it out with the homeless and the destitute, the victims of society, and then they put a cover over it, and then pretended, right, there's the cover over there. But when you look underneath the building and you look at Reactor 4, it's just a cover. It's just meant to manipulate you. Because those covers don't physically touch these buildings because the buildings would cave in. The fuel pools were at the top of the buildings. So this industry keeps getting away with these. They picked up 30 million. There was 105,000 sites like that. They rolled out all the useful idiots like Arnie
Now,
Gunderson.
the division I ran built nuclear fuel racks for boiling water reactors exactly like Fukushima. And Unit 4.
So he built the racks for the assemblies in the fuel pool for 70 reactors, exact models rather, in the United States. So if he doesn't know reactor 4 is gone, who does? If he doesn't know the fuel pools are at the top of the building, he's gone. And this is what I mean. You got all these smooth talkers out there. She was a spokesperson for the nuclear industry for 20 years. His wife. And when you look what the media done to you, you look what Greenpeace has got done to you, and all you got to do is take the truth. You know, if this video goes viral, that's the end of the nuclear industry. That's why I created that video, and these videos, or pictures rather, because the fuel pools are at the top of the buildings. There is no tops to the buildings. And I firmly believe everybody can absorb that. But you've been under siege for 80 years from your hateful media. With so much propaganda, it's impossible to wrap your mind around it unless you're like myself and the people that are here regularly. Then you get it, obviously, right? But it's the whole story is actually insane, isn't it? All right, so I'm not going to tie everybody up tonight. I spent so much time watching this today and so much time chopping the video up, right up until we went live. And now we're an hour and a half into the show. And I'm actually crashing as we're talking here. My brain is like, yeah, pushed it a little too hard today, dummy. Payback time. Which is okay. Now, they had another earthquake in Japan, in Tokyo, on land. On land by Tokyo. Which is an upper 5 in Japan's Shindu seismic intensity scale, which is a 7, which is about a 7.2 on the Richter scale, on land. And I haven't been able to get to that today. I got the headlines queued up in my browser on my other laptop, but I wanted to come out and challenge the nuclear industry tonight. Because that was horrifying to be there today. And I'm just scrolling back down. Bear with me 1 second. Bring up some connotations. That was horrifying. It was horrifying when I watched that today, and I seen all these prime ministers and presidents trying to sell you a dead horse. Dressed up as a pig and calling it a monkey. Strange days indeed. Anyway, let's close the poll down. Because once I burn out, I noticed one thing about me is I can go for another half an hour and not make any sense. Well, the Nuclear Energy Summit hopes of tripling nuclear power turn out to be just another nuclear fucking flop. I think we all know what the right answer was, dear. Let's kill that thing and call it a night. Have a great night, everybody. Hugs for everybody. We'll see everybody on the next show. I'm not sure if I might end up having to do a show tomorrow because of this. I'll be watching this tomorrow and see what the hell is going on with that. And that might be worthy of doing another show. Don't forget to give us a thumbs up if you made it this far into the show. We'll see everybody on the next show. I would keep an eye on my site tomorrow if you're on the go, because I very well might do a show tomorrow early or late. I'm not sure, but it could happen. And have a great night, everybody. Hugs for everybody. We'll see everybody. And Stephen Young got his infusions done this week. Rough time. Sorry to hear that, Stephen. Eventually we'll figure out how that's playing out and let everybody know. See everybody on the next show. Have a great night, everybody. Take care.